The air in Blackwood Cemetery always clung to a peculiar chill, even on the mildest of autumn nights. It was a chill that seeped not from the ground, but from the very stones themselves, a cold echo of countless forgotten lives. Elias, the cemetery keeper for the better part of 2 decades, had grown accustomed to its ancient embrace. His days were a monotonous rhythm of pruning overgrown roses, sweeping fallen leaves from cracked pathways, and polishing the names of the long-departed etched into marble and granite. But his nights, those were a different beast entirely. As dusk bled into true darkness, transforming the skeletal branches of ancient oaks into grasping talons against the bruised sky, Blackwood Cemetery ceased to be merely a resting place. It became something else, something subtly, unsettlingly alive. Elias, a hunched figure silhouetted against the waning twilight, would complete his final rounds, the crunch of gravel under his worn boots the only sound disturbing the deepening silence. He knew every crooked path, every leaning obelisk, every mausoleum whose stone angels wept perpetual tears. Yet, in recent weeks, a new, disquieting note had entered the cemetery's nocturnal symphony. It began subtly, with the faintest whisper carried on a breeze that wasn't there, a murmur that seemed to emanate directly from the earth itself. Then came the lights, fleeting, phosphorescent glows that flickered just beyond the periphery of his vision, dancing among the older, more weathered headstones. Elias, a man of quiet practicality, dismissed them as tricks of the moonlight or the last vestiges of dying fireflies. But the chill, that was harder to explain. It intensified around specific plots, radiating outwards, a palpable wave of absolute zero that pricked at his skin and gnawed at his bones, even through the thick wool of his coat. One particularly moonless night, as the fog coiled like spectral serpents around the ornate iron gates, Elias found himself drawn, inexplicably, to the oldest section of Blackwood, a forgotten corner where the gravestones stood like crooked teeth, their inscriptions long since surrendered to the relentless kiss of time and moss. There, amongst the crumbling markers, stood the monument to the Blackwood family, a towering, Gothic edifice of black marble, crowned with a weeping angel whose face had been eroded into a featureless mask of sorrow. It was here that the chill was most profound, so intense it felt as though the very air was being sucked from his lungs. As he approached, a faint, ethereal hum vibrated through the ground, rising from beneath the very roots of the ancient cypress trees. It wasn't a sound his ears could fully process, but rather a resonance that vibrated deep within his chest, a low, guttural thrumming that spoke of immense, restrained power. The Blackwood monument, usually a somber shadow, now pulsed with a faint, internal luminescence, a sickly green glow that outlined the cracked spiderwebbing across its surface. Elias froze, his breath catching in his throat, a primal dread coiling in his gut. He watched, mesmerized and horrified, as the light intensified, seeping from the stone like ichor. Then, with a sound like ancient, straining timbers, a section of the marble, near the base of the angel, began to shimmer. It wasn't a trick of the light, nor a distortion of the fog. The air itself seemed to ripple, distorting the gnarled branches behind it. And for a fleeting, terrifying moment, Elias saw through the stone. Beyond the shimmering veil, there was not the solid earth of a burial plot, but a swirling maelstrom of gray, formless energy, a void that promised both nothingness and endless torment. A gasp escaped his lips, a sound swallowed instantly by the cemetery's hungry silence. From within that swirling abyss, a form began to coalesce, indistinct at first, like smoke struggling to hold shape. It stretched, elongated, and then, with a silent, agonizing fluidity, a hand, skeletal and long-fingered, reached through the shimmering portal. It was not a corporeal hand, but one woven from shadow and despair, trailing wisps of ectoplasmic mist. It clawed at the air, its movements slow, deliberate, as if testing the boundaries of its prison, or perhaps its freedom. Elias stumbled backward, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He didn't wait to see more. Terror, cold and absolute, propelled him away from the Blackwood monument, away from the unnatural light and the reaching shadow. He ran blindly, through the labyrinth of graves, past the silent sentinels of stone, the chilling hum echoing in his ears long after he had burst through the gates and locked himself in his small, dusty cottage at the cemetery's edge. The night offered no respite. Sleep was a distant, mocking luxury. Every creak of the old house, every rustle of leaves outside, sounded like the scratching of those spectral fingers against the door. He tried to rationalize it away. A hallucination, exhaustion, the tricks played by an overactive imagination in the oppressive solitude of his work. But the image of that shimmering portal, the reaching hand, was burned into his mind, too vivid, too real. With the first pale streaks of dawn, Elias, hollow-eyed and trembling, ventured back into the cemetery. The Blackwood monument stood as it always had, silent, imposing, the weeping angel perpetually mourning. There was no green glow, no shimmering distortion, no sign of the horror he had witnessed. Yet, as he approached, a faint, almost imperceptible film of gray dust covered the ground around its base, and a single withered rose, which he had tended just the day before, lay shriveled and black at its foot, as if life had been violently sucked from it. The following nights brought no peace. The phenomena escalated. The faint hum grew louder, more pervasive, emanating from an increasing number of gravestones. Not just the ancient ones now, but newer, well-kept plots too. He saw more of the spectral flickers, more of the deep, bone-chilling cold spots. And then he saw them. First, just glimpses. A translucent figure drifting between rows of headstones, its form indistinct, its presence marked by an immediate, suffocating sorrow. Then, more clearly, faces, contorted in silent screams or vacant stares, peering from behind the veils of mist that now permanently clung to certain areas. They were not the benevolent spirits of folklore. These were not ghosts clinging to memories. These were restless, malevolent echoes, their presence draining the warmth and life from the air, leaving a lingering scent of decay and ozone. Elias, armed with only a rusty lantern and a growing sense of dread, began to understand. These gravestones, these silent sentinels of death, were not just markers. They were doors, portals to somewhere else, somewhere beyond, and something was forcing them open. And the souls, the lost, the damned, the forgotten, were beginning to spill into the world of the living, a silent, encroaching tide of spectral invasion. What would happen when the tide became a flood? And what, or who, was pulling the strings, orchestrating this macabre awakening of the dead? The very thought sent a shiver down his spine that had nothing to do with the cemetery's perpetual chill. Elias found himself trapped in a waking nightmare. The cemetery transformed from a place of quiet repose into a churning maelstrom of spectral energy. The chilling hum he had first dismissed now throbbed relentlessly, a low, resonant bass note beneath the symphony of the night, emanating from an ever-growing number of gravestones. He couldn't simply abandon Blackwood. It was his life, his only anchor in a world that had long since forgotten him. More than that, a terrifying sense of responsibility, of being the sole witness to this encroaching horror, compelled him to act. His initial attempts were born of desperation and a lifetime of practical, earthly solutions. Armed with a heavy spade, he first tried to rebury the exposed earth around the glowing Blackwood monument, as if covering the ground could somehow seal the breach. The soil, however, felt unnaturally cold, almost frozen, and refused to settle, crumbling away from the shimmering stone as if repelled by an unseen force. He drove iron stakes, blessed by a long-dead priest from a forgotten era, into the ground around other newly active graves, hoping their archaic power might ward off the unseen invaders. The stakes merely vibrated, humming with the same eerie resonance as the stones, until one by one, they snapped with sharp, percussive cracks, they shattered with splintering as if struck by an invisible hammer. He even tried to pray, mumbling forgotten verses from a dust-laden Bible kept in his cottage, but the words felt hollow, swallowed by the oppressive silence and the malevolent energies that now permeated the air. The souls, once mere fleeting glimpses, now manifested with chilling frequency and clarity. They were not the benign, sorrowful specters of Gothic tales. These were fragments of what once was, devoid of peace. their forms twisted by ancient anguishes or an unholy purpose. Some drifted aimlessly, their translucent figures like smudged charcoal drawings against the moonlight, their vacant eyes reflecting an eternal, silent scream. Others, however, moved with a disturbing, almost predatory intent. Elias saw them, a woman in a tattered wedding gown, her face a mask of silent fury, gliding towards the cemetery gates, only to dissipate into a cloud of freezing mist before reaching the iron bars. A child no older than 5, its spectral hands reaching, not for comfort, but for some unseen prey, its tiny, translucent form leaving trails of absolute zero in its wake. Their presence was a constant drain, not just on the air's warmth, but on his very spirit, leaving him bone-weary and hollow. The air would grow heavy, thick with the scent of ozone and something indescribably foul, like decaying metal and forgotten dreams. Whenever they drew near, sleep became an enemy, each night a gauntlet of terror. Elias would patrol with his old oil lantern, its feeble light a tiny defiant spark against the encroaching darkness. His eyes, perpetually bloodshot, scanned the rows of gravestones, trying to anticipate which would begin to hum next, which would pulse with that sickly green glow, which would open its silent maw to the beyond. He learned to recognize the telltale signs. A sudden drop in temperature so profound it stole the breath from his lungs. The scent of earth recently disturbed, but with no visible sign. The faint, disembodied whispers that seemed to coil around his ears like insidious smoke, promising forgotten secrets and unimaginable horrors. The whispers were new, and they were the most unsettling. They weren't the mournful sighs of the dead. These were sharp, insistent, and seemed to coalesce from the very fabric of the cemetery. They spoke in no discernible language, yet their meaning was clear. Freedom, escape, power. They seemed to direct the movements of some of the more malevolent spirits, guiding them, urging them toward specific points, always circling back to the oldest, most forgotten sections of Blackwood. Elias felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. This wasn't random. There was an intelligence behind the chaos, a dark will orchestrating the spectral invasion. One particularly harrowing night, a thick, unnatural fog rolled in, denser and colder than any Elias had ever experienced. It swallowed the moonlight, plunging the cemetery into a suffocating shroud of gray. As he moved through it, his lantern beam struggling to pierce the gloom, he heard a distinct, rhythmic scraping sound, like stone being dragged over stone, emanating from the ancient mausoleum of the Hawthorne family, a structure long sealed after a bizarre, mass disappearance generations ago. He approached cautiously, his heart thundering against his ribs, the cold biting at his exposed skin. The mausoleum's heavy stone door, which he had personally ensured was locked and sealed, was now ajar, a sliver of impenetrable darkness yawning within. From the opening, a chilling, guttural groan echoed, a sound too solid, too physical to be merely a spirit. It was the sound of something immense, something corporeal shifting within. A wave of intense cold washed over him, a physical force that nearly buckled his knees. He raised his lantern, its beam trembling, and peered into the abyss. There was nothing visible, only deeper darkness, yet the air within pulsed with an undeniable malevolent presence, a palpable weight that pressed against his chest, threatening to crush him. Then, from the depths of the mausoleum, a whisper, clearer than any he had heard before, slithered out directly into his mind. It was not a voice, but an insidious thought, piercing and cold. Soon, keeper. Soon, the chains will break. The words were not in his language, yet he understood them with a terrifying clarity that bypassed all reason. They resonated with the low hum of the gravestones, revealing a connection he hadn't fully grasped. The mausoleum door creaked wider, revealing not an empty tomb, but a swirling vortex of shadow that seemed to consume the very light from his lantern. Elias stumbled back, falling onto the damp earth, scrambling away from the yawning maw of the mausoleum. This was no mere ghost, no lost soul. This was something ancient, something that had been bound, and it was using the chaos of the open portals to break free. The souls were just pawns, diversions, fuel for its escape. The realization struck him with the force of a physical blow. He wasn't just trying to keep the dead in their graves. He was fighting an entity powerful enough to manipulate death itself, an entity that had been imprisoned here, within the very grounds he protected. The cemetery was not just a resting place, but a cage, and the bars were beginning to bend. What desperate, ancient power had created this prison? And how could a simple keeper hope to stand against a being that craved to control the very essence of mortality? The questions hammered at his mind, pushing him to the brink of despair. As the mausoleum door slowly, silently swung shut, leaving behind only the lingering scent of decay and the chilling promise of impending doom. The chilling pronouncement from the Hawthorne Mausoleum. Asterisk, soon, keeper, soon, the chains will break. Asterisk, had etched itself into Elias's very bones. A cold, unyielding truth that shattered any lingering pretense of sanity. The spectral invasion was not random. It was a deliberate, malevolent assault orchestrated by an intelligence ancient beyond reckoning. Blackwood was not merely a graveyard. It was a cage, and the creature within thrashed against its bindings. Elias no longer slept. His days blurred into a continuum of desperate, frantic searching. His only companions the omnipresent hum of the awakening stones, and the insidious whispers that now seemed to coil directly inside his skull, mocking his futile efforts. He scoured the dusty, forgotten corners of his small cottage, a dwelling that had served generations of keepers, each one a silent sentinel of Blackwood's secrets. He pulled out mildewed ledgers, their pages brittle with age, detailing burials from centuries past. He unearthed archaic maps, hand-drawn and faded, showing plots that had long since crumbled into indistinguishable earth. His fingers, rough from years of toil, traced over names and dates, searching for an anomaly, a pattern, anything that hinted at the cemetery's true, terrifying purpose. His eyes, perpetually bloodshot, scanned for symbols, for unusual markings, for any deviation from the mundane record of death. The air in the cottage grew thick with the scent of old paper and dust, mingling with the ever-present ozone and decay that seeped in from the grounds. Days bled into nights, each marked by escalating phenomena. The translucent figures of the restless dead no longer merely drifted. Some now moved with purpose, their vacant gazes fixed on Elias, their spectral hands reaching, not with malice, but with a chilling, desperate hunger, as if drawn by the dwindling warmth of his life force. He saw shapes coalesce from the mist, forms too large, too monstrous to be human, their outlines shifting, ephemeral, yet radiating an undeniable weight of malevolence. The whispers intensified, sometimes coalescing into a guttural, resonant voice that seemed to speak from the very ground, promising power, promising oblivion, promising an end to his suffering if only he would cease his meddling. Asterisk, yield, keeper, embrace the silence. Your world is already ours. Asterisk. His search eventually led him to a heavy, iron-bound chest, long forgotten beneath a loose floorboard in the cottage's deepest, dampest cellar. It reeked of damp earth and something else, something metallic and ancient. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, lay not gold or jewels, but a single massive leather-bound tome. Its covers were thick, unadorned hide, and its pages, parchment yellowed with the passage of centuries, were filled with intricate, hand-drawn diagrams and elegant, archaic script. It was a journal not of a keeper, but of an architect, an arcane scholar, a master mason from an age-long past. Its title, emblazoned in tarnished silver leaf, read, asterisk, The Grand Design of the Maw, a treatise on the containment of the Chthonic King, asterisk. Elias's hands trembled as he opened it. The air in the cellar grew impossibly cold, the whispers outside rising to a frenzied, triumphant chorus, as if the entity knew its secrets were being laid bare. The journal detailed, in chillingly precise language, the true origins of Blackwood Cemetery. It was not merely a burial ground, but a meticulously constructed prison, a colossal arcane device designed to contain an ancient, primeval entity known only as the Chthonic King. This being, the journal explained, was a consciousness born from the very concept of death, a a primordial force that sought to merge the realms of the living and the dead, to extinguish all life and claim every soul as its own. The cemetery's layout, Elias read with dawning horror, was a complex web of ley lines and sacred geometry. Each ancient headstone, each carefully placed mausoleum, each winding path was part of a vast, intricate seal. The Blackwood monument, where he had first witnessed the shimmering portal, was one of the primary anchors, its Gothic spires channeling the earth's protective energies. The Hawthorne mausoleum, from which the entity's whispers had last emanated, was revealed to be the very core of its prison, a deeper, more potent lock upon its essence. The very act of burial, of placing the dead within these hallowed grounds, unknowingly contributed to the entity's containment, their resting souls feeding the wards that bound it. But the wards were failing. The journal spoke of cyclical vulnerabilities, of the slow erosion of the seals over millennia. It spoke of a time when the Chthonic King would stir, when its immense power would begin to fray the fabric of its prison. The opening of the portals, the restless souls spilling forth. These were not random events. They were symptoms of the prison weakening, caused by the entity's immense pressure from within, its insidious will manipulating the very boundaries between life and death. The souls were not just escaping. They were being forced out, used as tools, as battering rams against the weakening walls of its confinement. Each new portal was a crack, each manifested spirit a shard of the breaking glass. The entity was not merely trying to escape, it was trying to dismantle the prison from the inside out, using the very dead it sought to control. A cold, crushing despair settled over Elias. He, a simple keeper of graves, was the unwitting guardian of a cosmic prison, the sole witness to an ancient apocalypse in the making. The Chthonic King desired not just freedom, but absolute dominion over death, to unleash its true horrific power upon the living world. And it was almost free. The journal offered no easy solution, no simple incantation, no magical key. It spoke only of the last guardian, the one who would stand between the world and the maw. As he closed the ancient tome, the whispers from outside intensified to a deafening roar within his mind, no longer taunting, but enraged. Asterisk, old man, you know the truth, and now you will know despair. Asterisk, the earth itself seemed to groan beneath the cottage, and a violent tremor shook the foundations, rattling the very bones of the house. Outside, the spectral hum from the cemetery rose to a piercing shriek, and Elias heard the distinct, sickening sound of ancient stone groaning, cracking, giving way. The prison was failing. The Chthonic King was making its final, desperate push for freedom, and Elias, with the knowledge of its true nature now burning in his mind, knew with terrifying certainty that he was the only thing standing between it and a world plunged into eternal, agonizing night. He had to stop it. He had to face the ancient guardian who sought to consume all. The earth beneath Elias's feet bucked and groaned, a visceral protest from the very bones of the world. The cottage, his sanctuary for decades, shrieked in unison, timbers groaning like dying beasts, glass panes shattering inward with explosive force, as the ancient wards of Blackwood Cemetery finally began to buckle under the immense pressure. The scent of ozone, decay, and something indescribably ancient, like pulverized starlight and forgotten fear, choked the air, making every breath a struggle. Outside, the spectral hum, which had merely vibrated, now escalated into a piercing, discordant symphony of agony and triumph. It was the sound of a cage collapsing, of a prisoner roaring its imminent freedom. Elias, clutching the heavy, leather-bound tome to his chest as if it were a shield against the encroaching oblivion, knew with chilling certainty that the final hour was upon them. The Chthonic King, the primordial consciousness of death, was breaking free. Despair, a cold, insidious tendril, tried to coil around his heart, threatening to paralyze him. He was just a man, an old, weary keeper of graves, pitted against an entity that predated time, a being capable of wielding the very essence of mortality. What could he do? The journal offered no direct path to victory, no incantation to reseal such a force, but it had spoken of a last guardian, and a terrible, dawning understanding grew in Elias's mind. The cemetery was and broken walls, translucent figures, once mere wisps, now struggle with terrifying clarity. As the storm of spectral children, their vacant eyes fixed on the mausoleum, their forms shimmering in the devil magic, no longer nameless, drawn, compelled, whispers, once insidious, now scream, cotton with lost voices, a chorus of despair, anticipation, asterisk, free us, he comes, asterisk, they shrieked, their words are chilling gale into the very fabric of reality. Ancient cypress trees rise as if in agony, their gnarled branches clawing in the sky and into the bruised sickle. The air was thick, suffocating, miasma of decay, ozone, and raw, unadulterated terror in the undying moments. Elias pushed through the spectral time, the weighty journal still clutched in his hand, its pages fluttering as if alive. Each step was a battle against unseen forces, against the oppressive weight of the unleashed dead. He could feel them, their cold fingers brushing his skin, their silent screams tearing at his sanity. He stumbled past an open grave, its occupant, a skeletal hand still clawing at the earth, reaching towards him. He ignored it, his gaze fixed on the moving Gothic silhouette of the Hawthorne mausoleum. It pulsed with a sickening black light, a vortex of shadow in the ceiling, storms, rhythmic scraping sound he had heard before escalated into a thunderous, grinding roar. The sound of colossal stone tearing apart, ancient chains slamming as he neared the mausoleum. Its immense stone door, once merely ajar, now stood wide open, a gaping maw into abyss. From within, the black light intensified, coalescing into a shimmering, undulating column of pure shadow that reached towards the blue sky. It was not a physical form, not a creature of flesh and bone, an intimate concept, living void, a consciousness woven from the threads of all death, all sorrow, all oblivion. Tendrils of shadow like grasping, infinitely long fingers, writhed from its form, reaching out, not for Elias, but for the very essence of the cemetery, for the ley lines, for the souls that were now a chaotic maelstrom around it. The Chthonic King, though formless, communicated with a terrifying clarity that bypassed sound, piercing directly into Elias's mind. Asterisk, the chains, they are broken, the world of the living. It will finally embrace its true master. All will be silence. All will be mine. Asterisk, its voice was not a single entity, but a chorus of a million dying breaths, a symphony of forgotten screams, a whisper of infinite emptiness. Elias felt his own life force being drawn, pulled towards the entity, his very being threatening to unravel. The spectral figures of the dead, once so terrifying, now seemed small, insignificant, mere motes of dust in the face of this primal, consuming force. They writhed, some drawn into the vortex, others repelled by its sheer power, their moans of despair mingling with the entity's triumphant roar. Elias knew he could not fight it with strength, nor with magic he did not possess. His weapon was the knowledge, the design of the prison itself. The journal, heavy in his hands, felt suddenly warm, almost alive. It wasn't just a book, it was a key. The last guardian wasn't someone who fought the king, but someone who became the prison. He looked at the swirling void, at the spectral tendrils already reaching beyond the cemetery walls, threatening to engulf the sleeping world. He had spent his life tending to the dead, protecting their silent repose. Now he would become a part of it. With a guttural cry that was more defiance than despair, Elias threw himself forward, not towards the entity, but towards the heart of the mausoleum, towards the very source of the black light. The Chthonic King recoiled, its form momentarily flickering, a ripple of surprise in its vast, ancient consciousness. Asterisk, fool, you seek oblivion, you seek to join your feeble dead. Asterisk, it shrieked, its voice a hurricane of despair. Elias ignored it. He pressed the journal against the rough, cold stone of the mausoleum's inner wall, at the precise point indicated by a faint, almost invisible symbol on one of the tome's last pages, a symbol of binding, of sacrifice. As the leather touched the stone, a searing pain lanced through his hand, then shot up his arm, spreading through his entire body. It was not the pain of a physical wound, but of his very essence being drawn, stretched, pulled apart, and then reformed. The black light from the entity pulsed violently, trying to repel him, but the binding had begun. His skin began to crack, not with age, but with the pressure of arcane energies coursing through him. His bones felt as though they were turning to marble, his blood to molten lead. The cemetery's hum, which had been a shriek of release, now began to shift, to lower, to resolve itself into a deep, resonant thrum of containment. Elias felt the ley lines of Blackwood Cemetery, the sacred geometry, the very purpose of the prison, flood into him, integrating with his being. He was no longer Elias, the old keeper. He was becoming a part of Blackwood, a living, conscious lock on the Chthonic King's eternal cage. The black light from the entity flickered, then dimmed, shrinking back into the depths of the mausoleum, its furious roars turning into impotent snarls, then fading into a chilling, mournful whisper of defeat. The spectral figures of the dead, which had been thrashing in the vortex, now seemed to settle, their forms coalescing, their vacant eyes turning, not towards the world of the living, but towards Elias. They were still lost, still restless, but the malevolence was gone, replaced by a deep, ancient sorrow. They were no longer pawns of the king, but souls awaiting solace, awaiting guidance. And Elias, now the new, living anchor of the prison, felt their presence, their myriad sorrows, their eternal wandering within him. His transformation was complete. His body, though still recognizably human, was now imbued with the cold, enduring essence of the cemetery itself. His skin was pale as weathered marble. His eyes, once weary, now held the ancient, knowing gaze of centuries. He could feel every single soul interred in Blackwood, every whisper, every lingering echo. He was the cemetery, and the cemetery was him. The portals, which had been gaping maws, now shimmered, their light fading, contracting, until they were once again mere gravestones, silent, cold, and sealed. He stood there, unmoving, rooted to the spot where he had made his terrible, beautiful sacrifice. The air, though still holding a faint scent of ozone, was no longer thick with malevolence. The cemetery was quiet once more, a quiet born not of peace, but of profound, eternal containment. Elias, the keeper, was gone. In his place stood the guardian, condemned to an eternity of vigil, to forever protect the lost souls of Blackwood, and to ensure that the Chthonic King remained imprisoned, a silent sentinel against an apocalypse that would never come, his lonely watch stretching into the endless, silent nights.